Folks, I'm going to tell you something that will fundamentally alter how you understand American politics. At precisely 9:23 a.m. on a cold Thursday morning in January, Adam Schiff walked through the security checkpoint at the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building in Washington, D.C. He carried his leather briefcase, wore his customary red power tie, and had absolutely no idea that in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, his entire world would detonate. By the time the sun set on that winter day, this man, this Harvard-educated lawyer, this former federal prosecutor who had positioned himself as the guardian of American democracy, would be sitting in a federal holding cell, his hands still trembling from the handcuffs, his throat raw from screaming denials that nobody believed anymore. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, to truly comprehend the magnitude of what happened, we need to go back. We need to start at the beginning of what would become the most spectacular political destruction in American history. The morning started like any other for Senator Adam Schiff. His alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. in his Georgetown townhouse, the same time it had gone off every weekday for the past 8 years. He developed routines, you see. Powerful men always do. They mistake routine for invincibility. They confuse predictability with safety. Adam Schiff had made that mistake for far too long. While he was showering in his marble bathroom, while he was selecting that red tie from his closet full of identical red ties, while he was kissing his wife goodbye and climbing into his black Suburban with the tinted windows, a team of FBI forensic analysts 3 miles away was completing their final review of evidence that would end him. They'd been working through the night, triple-checking every document, every recording, every financial transaction, because they knew what was coming. They knew that when you take down someone this powerful, someone this connected, someone this arrogant, you better have your case absolutely airtight. No room for error. No space for reasonable doubt. Just cold, hard, irrefutable truth. Deputy Director Dan Bongino had arrived at FBI headquarters at 4:30 that morning. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours. Couldn't sleep, actually. Too much adrenaline. Too much anticipation. For 4 years, he'd been building this case piece by piece, witness by witness, recording by recording. 4 years of watching Adam Schiff on television, lying to the American people with that practiced prosecutor's confidence, that Harvard-trained smugness, that absolute certainty that he was untouchable. Bongino had watched every interview, studied every congressional hearing, analyzed every public statement. He'd built a psychological profile of Schiff that was thicker than most FBI case files. He knew how the man thought, how he operated, how he would react when cornered. And today, Adam Schiff was going to be cornered in a way he'd never experienced in his entire privileged life. Bongino stood in the command center, surrounded by monitors showing real-time feeds from security cameras throughout the building. His team of 12 special agents, each one hand-picked for loyalty and discretion, sat at their stations running final system checks. The conference room on the 7th floor had been prepared like a courtroom. 6 cameras positioned for optimal coverage. Audio recording equipment that could pick up a whisper from 50 feet away. A secure video system linked directly to classified government networks. And in the center of it all, a simple wooden table with 2 chairs facing each other. 1 chair for the interrogator. 1 chair for the accused. Agent Sarah Chen approached Bongino with a tablet displaying the morning's intelligence briefing. "Sir, Senator Schiff just entered the building. Security logged him in at 9:23. He's currently in the ground floor lobby." Bongino nodded without taking his eyes off the monitors. He could see Schiff on camera now, chatting casually with the security guard, that confident smile never wavering. The senator had been told this was a routine briefing on international surveillance protocols. Standard Intelligence Committee oversight. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. "Let him come up," Bongino said quietly. "No escort, no special treatment, just regular elevator access to 7. Chen hesitated. "Sir, protocol requires." "I know what protocol requires, Agent Chen. I wrote half those protocols when I was in the Secret Service. Today, we're doing this my way." His voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had spent 12 years protecting presidents and another 12 years hunting criminals. "Adam Schiff is about to take the longest elevator ride of his life, and I want him to take it alone. thinking he's still in control, still believing he's walking into just another briefing. Because in about 8 minutes, that illusion is going to shatter into a million pieces. The elevator doors closed on the 7th floor, and Adam Schiff stepped out into a corridor that felt wrong somehow. Too quiet, too empty. Where were the usual staffers rushing between offices? Where were the administrative assistants and junior agents? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a sound that seemed amplified by the silence. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the tile floor, each step echoing in a way that made his pulse quicken slightly. Instinct, that prosecutor's instinct developed over decades in courtrooms, was beginning to whisper warnings. Something wasn't right here, but Schiff pushed the feeling down, forced his confident smile back into place, and approached the conference room door marked 717. The door was heavy, solid oak with a small window of reinforced glass. Through it, he could see a figure sitting with his back to the door. Schiff's hand touched the handle, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, he considered turning around, walking away, making an excuse, claiming a scheduling conflict. But Adam Schiff hadn't gotten where he was by showing weakness or fear. He'd built his career on projecting absolute confidence, even when he felt none. Especially when he felt none. So he pushed open the door and walked into the room where his life would end. Dan Bongino didn't turn around immediately. He let Schiff enter, let him close the door, let him take 3 steps into the room before speaking. "Have a seat, Senator. We've been expecting you." The voice was familiar. Schiff had heard it before on television, on podcasts, in congressional hearings. But context changes everything. Here, in this sterile room with that tone of absolute certainty, it sounded different, dangerous. Bongino slowly swiveled his chair around, and for the first time, Adam Schiff saw the expression on his face. Not anger, not hatred, something worse, satisfaction. The look of a hunter who'd been tracking dangerous prey for years and finally had it cornered. "Deputy Director Bongino," Schiff said, forcing his voice to remain steady, falling back on his prosecutor's training. "Control the narrative, assert authority. I was expecting Director Wallace for this briefing." "Director Wallace is busy," Bongino replied, his street cop edge cutting through the formal atmosphere like a knife. "Busy preparing arrest warrants, actually, but we'll get to that." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Arrest warrants, plural. Schiff felt his stomach drop, felt that cold sensation spreading through his chest that he'd seen on the faces of defendants when they realized they were trapped. But he was Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, senator from California, Harvard Law graduate. He didn't get trapped. "I don't appreciate jokes, Deputy Director," Schiff said, moving toward one of the chairs with manufactured casualness. "If this is some kind of, sit down, Adam." Bongino's voice didn't rise, didn't get louder, but the command in it was absolute. And for the first time in decades, Adam Schiff found himself following orders instead of giving them. He sat. The chair was uncomfortable, deliberately so. The kind of chair used in interrogation rooms, designed to keep subjects off balance, unable to relax. Schiff's prosecutor's training recognized the technique, but recognition didn't make it any less effective. Bongino reached down beside his chair and lifted a cardboard box onto the table between them. Not a slim folder, not a briefcase. A full-sized archive box, the kind that holds thousands of pages of documents. The label on the side, visible from Schiff's position, read, "Operation Cardinal EYES only director authorization required." "Do you know what's in this box, Adam?" Bongino asked, his hand resting on the lid with almost casual possessiveness. Schiff's throat had gone dry. That code name, Cardinal. Only a handful of people knew that code name. It was Chinese intelligence designation, part of Beijing's spy network. How did Bongino know that name? "I have no idea what you're talking about," Schiff said. But his voice betrayed him, coming out slightly higher than intended. "That's the thing about liars," Bongino said, leaning back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone holding all the cards. "They always answer too quickly. They don't take time to think about the question because they're too busy trying to control the narrative. You've been controlling narratives for 8 years, Adam. Press conferences, television interviews, congressional hearings. Always the same pattern. Someone asks you a question, and before they even finish asking, you're already spinning your answer. But today's different. Today, you're going to sit there and listen. You're going to hear evidence. You're going to watch videos. You're going to listen to recordings. And you're going to realize that every single lie you told, every single betrayal you committed, every single American you put at risk, we documented all of it. Bongino opened the box with deliberate slowness, revealing stacks of documents organized with color-coded tabs. Red tabs, blue tabs, yellow tabs. Each one representing a different category of evidence, a different thread of investigation, a different nail in Adam Schiff's political coffin. Let's start with something simple, Bongino said, pulling out a thin folder from the top of the stack. March 22, 2017. You went on Meet the Press. You told Chuck Todd that you had seen, quote, more than circumstantial evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Do you remember that interview? Schiff's Harvard training kicked in. When confronted with old statements, always add context. Of course I remember, and I stand by what I said. The evidence at the time suggested. The evidence at the time, Bongino interrupted, his voice taking on an edge that made Schiff's next words die in his throat, was nothing. You had nothing. We know you had nothing because we've now reviewed every single document you had access to at that time. FBI reports, CIA briefings, NSA intercepts. All of it, and none of it, not one single piece of intelligence, supported your claim. Bongino slid a document across the table. It was a declassified FBI memo dated March 20th, 2017, 2 days before Schiff's television appearance. The summary line read, "No evidence found supporting allegations of Trump-Russia coordination." That's one memo, Schiff said, trying to regain his footing. Intelligence analysis requires looking at multiple sources, understanding context. You want multiple sources. Bongino's smile was predatory. Let me give you multiple sources. He began pulling documents from the box, sliding them across the table one after another, each one landing in front of Schiff with a soft thump that sounded like a judge's gavel. CIA assessment March 18th. No evidence. NSA report March 19th. No evidence. Defense Intelligence Agency analysis March 21st. No evidence. Five Eyes intelligence sharing summary March 20th. No evidence. You want me to keep going? Because I've got 47 more documents just like these, all dated before your television appearance, all saying the same thing. There was no evidence. The documents were piling up in front of Schiff now, forming a small mountain of classified intelligence reports, each one contradicting the statements he'd made to the American people. His hands, resting on the table, had begun to tremble slightly. He clasped them together, trying to hide the physical manifestation of his growing panic. Intelligence analysis is an art, not a science, Schiff said, falling back on the vague language that had protected him in the past. Different analysts can look at the same information and reach different conclusions. Different conclusions, Bongino repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. Is that what we're calling it now? When every single intelligence agency says there's no evidence, but Adam Schiff goes on national television and claims he's seen proof, that's not a different conclusion. That's a lie. And we're going to prove it wasn't just any lie. It was a coordinated, intentional, systematic deception of the American people. Bongino reached back into his box and pulled out something that made Schiff's breath catch in his throat. A digital audio recorder. Old-fashioned, the kind with physical buttons and a small speaker. The kind that couldn't be hacked remotely, couldn't be tampered with digitally. The kind that, if it contained what Bongino claimed, would be admissible in any court in America. Before I play this, Adam, I want you to understand something important. Bongino held the recorder up, letting it catch the light from the overhead fluorescence. This recording was obtained legally. No wiretaps, no illegal surveillance, no constitutional violations. You see, you made your phone calls on an unsecured line. You coordinated your media strategy using regular phones, regular networks, with no encryption, no security protocols. And federal law is very clear. When you make calls on an unsecured line discussing potential crimes, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. Schiff's face had gone pale. He was thinking, calculating, trying to remember every phone call he'd made, every conversation he'd had. How many had been on secure lines? How many had been on his personal cell phone? How many times had he gotten careless, confident in his own invincibility? Deputy Director, any recording of congressional communications would constitute illegal surveillance under. Save the lawyer talk, Senator. Bongino cut him off. You know the law as well as I do. Hell, you used to be a prosecutor. So you know that when someone commits a crime, conversations about that crime aren't protected. And what you're about to hear isn't surveillance, it's evidence. Bongino's finger hovered over the play button. Last chance, Adam. You can confess right now, tell me everything, cooperate fully. Maybe we can work something out, reduce charges, lighter sentence, some dignity preserved, or we can do this the hard way. The room fell into tense silence. Schiff stared at the recorder, his mind racing through possibilities. Was Bongino bluffing? Was this some kind of elaborate intimidation tactic? But something in the deputy director's eyes, that absolute certainty, that complete confidence, told him this was real. Whatever was on that recorder, it was bad, very bad. I have nothing to confess, Schiff said, but his voice betrayed him again, coming out as barely more than a whisper. Bongino smiled. Wrong answer. He pressed play. The audio quality was crystal clear, obviously recorded on a professional device with noise cancellation technology. And the voice that came through the small speaker was unmistakably Adam Schiff's. Jake, I need you to run with the Russia story tomorrow morning. Lead with it. I don't care what else is happening in the news cycle, make this the headline. There was a pause, then another voice responded. Jake Tapper's voice, recognizable to anyone who watched CNN. Adam, I need to be careful here. If we lead with this and it turns out there's nothing to it, we lose credibility. Are you absolutely certain about your sources? Schiff's recorded voice came back, confident and commanding. Jake, trust me on this. I've seen the intelligence, it's damning. We just need to keep the pressure on until after the midterms. Once we take back the House, we can launch formal investigations, subpoena witnesses, really dig into this. But we need the public primed for it. We need them believing Trump is compromised before we even start the official hearings. What exactly have you seen? Tapper's voice asked. Can you give me specifics? The specifics don't matter right now, Schiff's voice replied, and there was something in his tone, something casual and dismissive, that made the words even more damning. What matters is the narrative. Trump colluded with Russia. Trump is compromised. Trump is a threat to democracy. Keep saying it, keep implying it, keep letting your analysts speculate about it. By the time anyone asks for actual proof, we'll already have the public convinced. The recording continued, but Bongino paused it, letting those last words hang in the air. The specifics don't matter right now. What matters is the narrative. He looked at Schiff with something approaching pity. You really said that, Adam, out loud, to a journalist. You told him the truth didn't matter, only the story you wanted told. Schiff tried to speak, tried to formulate some explanation, some context that would make this less damaging, but his throat had closed up. His carefully constructed world of controlled narratives and managed messages was collapsing around him, and he could feel the walls closing in. That's just one call, Bongino continued. We've got 47 more just like it. You and Tapper, you and Rachel Maddow, you and Chris Cuomo before CNN fired him, you and Don Lemon. You coordinated with all of them, Adam. You fed them stories you knew weren't true, you gave them leads you knew wouldn't pan out, you promised them evidence you knew didn't exist. All to create a narrative, all to damage a president you couldn't beat at the ballot box. Bongino pressed play again. This time the conversation was between Schiff and another voice, female, with the distinctive cadence of Rachel Maddow. Adam, my producers are pushing back on this, Maddow's voice said, sounding concerned. They're saying we need more than just your assurances. We need documents, we need sources we can verify independently. Schiff's response was chilling in its casualness. Rachel, you've got to trust me here. I can't give you documents because they're classified. I can't give you sources because they're protected. But I'm telling you, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, as someone who has seen everything the FBI and CIA have collected, Trump is dirty. He's compromised. And if we don't act now, if we don't keep the pressure on, he's going to get away with it. But Adam, Maddow's voice pressed, what if we're wrong? What if it turns out there's no there? The pause before Schiff's response was brief, but in that pause you could hear him thinking, calculating. Then we'll deal with it when that time comes. But right now the risk of not acting is greater than the risk of being wrong. Sometimes you have to trust your gut, Rachel. And my gut tells me Trump is guilty, even if we can't prove it yet. So let's keep digging, keep investigating, keep reporting. The proof will come. Bongino stopped the recording again. The proof will come, he repeated, his voice heavy with disgust. Except the proof never came, did it, Adam, because there was no proof. There was never any proof, you knew it, the FBI knew it, the CIA knew it. Every intelligence agency knew it. But you kept lying anyway. You kept going on television, kept giving interviews, kept making speeches, all while knowing you were deceiving the American people. Schiff found his voice finally, though it came out defensive and strained. I believed at the time that the evidence would emerge. Intelligence gathering is an ongoing process. Stop, Bongino commanded. Just stop. You don't get to play that game anymore. Not here. Not with me. I've got recordings of you admitting you had no proof. I've got documents showing every intelligence report you received. I've got testimony from FBI agents who briefed you telling you there was nothing there. You didn't believe evidence would emerge. You hoped you could create enough smoke that people would assume there was fire. Bongino pulled another device from his box, this one a tablet computer. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to face Schiff. This is an email you sent to your chief of staff on April 3, 2017. We recovered it from your personal email account after a federal judge issued a warrant based on probable cause of criminal activity. The email appeared on the screen, and Schiff could see his own words staring back at him. The message was short, just 3 lines, but those 3 lines were devastating. The Mueller investigation isn't giving us what we need. We need to find another angle. What about Ukraine? Can we develop something there? That email, Bongino said quietly, was sent 4 months before President Trump's phone call with President Zelensky, 4 months before any Ukraine controversy even existed. You were already looking for a new attack vector, already shopping for a new scandal, already planning the next phase of your campaign to destroy a president. Schiff tried to dismiss it. That's being taken completely out of context. I was simply suggesting we investigate all potential avenues of foreign interference. All potential avenues. Bongino's voice rose for the first time, real anger breaking through his professional composure. You were manufacturing scandals, Adam. You were sitting in your congressional office, using your position as Intelligence Committee chairman, actively searching for ways to impeach a president. Not because you had evidence of wrongdoing, but because you wanted him gone. The deputy director stood up, pacing now, his frustration evident in every movement. Do you know what's funny, Adam? Actually funny in a sick, twisted way. I spent 12 years protecting presidents. 12 years of putting my life on the line, taking bullets in Brooklyn as an NYPD cop, facing down threats when I was in the Secret Service. I protected President Obama, even though I disagreed with almost everything he did politically, because that was my job. That was my oath. To protect and serve regardless of personal feelings. But you were supposed to conduct oversight. You were supposed to be a check on executive power, sure, but an honest check, a fair check. Instead, you weaponized your position. You turned congressional oversight into a political hit job. You used classified intelligence briefings not to protect America, but to destroy your political enemies. Bongino returned to his seat, his voice dropping back to that dangerous quiet that was somehow more intimidating than shouting. And that's just the media coordination. That's just the lying to the American people. We haven't even gotten to the real crimes yet. We haven't talked about the FISA court. We haven't talked about the fabricated evidence. We haven't talked about the whistleblower you helped create. And we definitely haven't talked about China. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. China. Schiff's face, already pale, went completely white. The color drained so completely that Bongino actually worried for a moment that the senator might pass out. I don't know what you're talking about, Schiff whispered. Of course you don't, Bongino replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You never know what anyone's talking about, do you, Adam? It's always someone else's fault, always a misunderstanding, always taken out of context. But here's the thing about the truth. It doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care about your spin. It doesn't care about your Harvard education or your political connections or your media friends. The truth just is. And the truth about you, Adam Schiff, is that you're not just a liar. You're not just a political operative. You're a traitor. The word landed like a physical blow, traitor. It was the one accusation that couldn't be spun, couldn't be contextualized, couldn't be explained away. It was the ultimate political death sentence. That's outrageous, Schiff said, trying to inject outrage into his voice, but it came out weak and desperate. You can't possibly what? Bongino interrupted. Can't possibly prove it. Want to bet? He reached into the box again, this time pulling out a thick manila envelope marked with red classification stamps. This envelope contains financial records obtained through a joint operation between the FBI, Treasury Department, and our intelligence partners in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. It took us 3 years to piece it all together, following the money through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and intermediary banks. But we got there, Adam. We followed every dollar. Bongino opened the envelope and began spreading documents across the table. Bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate registration documents. Each one represented a piece of a financial puzzle that, when assembled, formed a picture of corruption so vast it was almost hard to believe. "Let's start with something simple," Bongino said, pointing to a bank statement from a Swiss account. This account, numbered 784-991-C47, was opened in March 2017 by a company called Strategic Consulting International. The corporate registration lists the beneficial owner as Schiff. Your wife, Adam. Schiff's hands were shaking visibly now. My wife runs a consulting business. There's nothing illegal about having a Swiss bank account for a legitimate business, Bongino agreed. But this isn't a legitimate business, is it? Strategic Consulting International has no employees, no office, no clients except one. And that one client has paid your wife's company $47 million over the past 5 years. He let that number sink in. $47 million, more money than most Americans would see in 10 lifetimes. Who was the client? Schiff asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Golden Dragon Investments, Bongino replied. A Hong Kong-based firm that, when we traced it back through 6 layers of shell companies, turns out to be wholly owned by the Chinese Ministry of State Security. Your wife's consulting firm, Adam, was being paid by Chinese intelligence. The evidence kept coming, document after document, each one more damaging than the last. Wire transfers coinciding with congressional votes. Payments made days after Schiff had blocked legislation unfavorable to Chinese interests. Deposits following intelligence briefings where classified information about American spy networks in China had been discussed. June 15, 2019, Bongino said, reading from one document. Your wife's account receives a wire transfer of $2.3 million. What happened 3 days earlier, Adam? What did you do on June 12 that was worth $2.3 million to the Chinese government? Schiff said nothing. There was nothing he could say. The financial records spoke for themselves. I'll tell you what you did, Bongino continued. On June 12, 2019, you attended a classified briefing where the CIA presented a list of American intelligence assets operating in mainland China. Names, cover identities, operational details. Highly classified information that, if it fell into Chinese hands, would result in those agents being arrested, tortured, and executed. 3 weeks after that briefing, Adam, 6 of those agents disappeared. 6 American spies vanished in China. And we found out why. Bongino placed a photograph on the table. It showed Schiff in what appeared to be a restaurant, sitting across from a Chinese man in an expensive suit. The photo was grainy, obviously taken with a long-range lens, but the faces were clearly identifiable. This is you having dinner with Chen Wei at a restaurant in Beverly Hills on June 14, 2019. 2 days after the CIA briefing. Chen Wei, by the way, is a deputy director of the MSS, Chinese intelligence. This wasn't a chance meeting, Adam. This was a debriefing. You were passing classified information to a foreign intelligence service. That's circumstantial, Schiff said weakly. Having dinner with someone doesn't prove. You're right, Bongino interrupted. Having dinner proves nothing. That's why we needed more. That's why we spent 2 years building this case, and that's why we have this. He pulled out yet another digital recorder. This one was newer, sleeker, with a small display screen showing a date and time stamp. December 3, 2020. You remember this date, Adam? Schiff's face gave him away. He remembered. The NSA, working under proper legal authority with FISA court approval, intercepted a phone call between a phone number registered to you and a number in Beijing known to be used by MSS officers. The call was flagged by our systems because it contained keywords related to classified military programs. Once flagged, we obtained judicial permission to record and transcribe it. Everything done legally, everything by the book, everything admissible in court. Bongino's hand hovered over the play button. "This is the call that proves you're a traitor, Adam. This is the call where you sold out American military personnel for Chinese money. Last chance. Confess now, tell us everything, and maybe we can arrange for life in prison instead of execution. Because once I play this, once this becomes evidence in your treason trial, you're done. Finished. No plea deals. No reduced sentences. Just a very long trial followed by a very permanent punishment." The silence in the room was absolute. No sound except the faint hum of the air conditioning and Schiff's labored breathing. His mind was racing, calculating options, looking for any possible escape. But there was none. He could see it in Bongino's eyes. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't theater. This was the end. "I want a lawyer," Schiff finally said, the traditional last refuge of the guilty. "You can have 50 lawyers," Bongino replied. "After you hear this recording, after you understand exactly how much trouble you're in, after you realize that there is no legal defense, no procedural argument, no technicality that's going to save you." He pressed play. The voice that emerged from the speaker was Schiff's, panicked and frightened in a way the American public had never heard him. "They know. The FBI knows about the payments. I need extraction options. I need—" A Chinese-accented voice interrupted, calm and businesslike. "Cardinal, we have discussed this. You are too valuable to extract now. The operation continues." "Operation?" Schiff's recorded voice sounded desperate. "What operation? I've given you everything you asked for. I've passed intelligence, I've blocked legislation, I've protected your interests in Congress. The deal was money for information, that's it. Now Bongino has recordings, he has financial records, he has photographs. I'm exposed." "Then you must eliminate the exposure," the Chinese voice said calmly. "We have dealt with such problems before. There are methods. The journalist who was investigating, Anthony Bourdain, we solved that problem. The Navy SEAL who survived Operation Neptune's thunder and could testify, we can solve that problem too. These are technical issues, Cardinal, not strategic concerns." "You're talking about murder," Schiff's voice said, but there was something in his tone, not horror, not refusal. Consideration. He was actually considering it. The recording continued, and with each word, Schiff's fate became more sealed. He discussed operational details. He accepted instructions. He agreed to payment terms for what he kept calling problem resolution. When Bongino finally stopped the playback, Schiff was slumped in his chair, all pretense of confidence gone. "That recording," Bongino said quietly, "is why you're never going to see daylight again as a free man. You weren't just passing information to China. You were actively working as a Chinese intelligence asset. You were taking orders. You were agreeing to commit murder on American soil at the direction of a foreign government. That's not just treason, Adam. That's the kind of treason that earns you a spot in history books as one of America's greatest traitors. Benedict Arnold-level treason." Bongino stood up and walked to the door, opening it to reveal 2 federal marshals waiting in the hallway. But before they entered, before the formal arrest process began, Bongino turned back to Schiff one more time. "You know what the worst part is, Adam? You could have been a good congressman. You're smart, you're educated, you worked hard to get where you are. But somewhere along the way, you decided that your political ambitions were more important than your country. You decided that power was more important than truth. You decided that winning was more important than integrity. And now you're going to spend whatever time you have left, whether it's in a prison cell or on death row, thinking about all the Americans who died because of you. The intelligence agents in China, the sailors on those submarines, maybe even Anthony Bourdain, all dead because Adam Schiff wanted money and power more than he wanted to serve his country." The marshals entered the room, handcuffs ready. One of them began reading the formal arrest warrant in the monotone voice of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Adam Bennett Schiff, you are under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, violation of the Espionage Act, bribery, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." But Schiff wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the table covered with evidence of his crimes, his mind unable to process how completely his world had collapsed in the span of a few hours. As the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, Bongino delivered his final message. "Welcome to justice, Senator. It's been waiting for you for a long time." The walk from the conference room to the federal holding cells took exactly 8 minutes. the same amount of time the elevator ride up had taken. But while that elevator ride had been the last moments of Adam Schiff's freedom, this walk was the first steps of his permanent confinement. Every FBI agent they passed stopped working to watch. No one spoke. No one cheered. This wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment of profound sadness that someone entrusted with protecting America had instead betrayed it so completely. News of Schiff's arrest hit the media within minutes. The same networks that had given him unlimited airtime to spread his accusations were now scrambling to cover his downfall. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. CNN, MSNBC, the major newspapers, they all led with breaking news banners. But this time, Adam Schiff wasn't the source. He was the story. In the FBI's Media Relations Office, Deputy Director Bongino stood before a hastily assembled press conference. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and broadcast equipment. Every major news outlet in America was represented. Some had sent their top anchors. This was history in the making, and everyone knew it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bongino began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent 4 years building to this moment. "Today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrested Senator Adam Schiff on multiple charges including treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit murder. I want to be very clear about what these charges represent. This is not a political prosecution. This is not payback. This is not revenge. This is justice." He paused, letting that word hang in the air. Justice. For 4 years, Senator Schiff used his position as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and later as a United States senator to systematically deceive the American people. He lied about Russian collusion. He fabricated evidence. He coordinated with media outlets to spread false narratives. He threatened federal judges. He intimidated witnesses. And most seriously, he sold classified information to Chinese intelligence in exchange for tens of millions of dollars. The reporters erupted with questions, but Bongino held up his hand for silence. "I will take questions, but first, I want the American people to understand the scope of what we uncovered." Senator Schiff's betrayal resulted in the deaths of at least 6 CIA officers operating in China. It compromised American submarine technology that led to the loss of 3 vessels and 401 sailors. It undermined faith in our intelligence community, our judicial system, and our democratic processes. The damage he caused will take years to fully assess and decades to repair. A reporter from Fox News called out, "Deputy Director, do you have evidence to support these extraordinary charges?" Bongino's response was immediate and devastating. "We have 47 separate recordings of Senator Schiff coordinating with media outlets to spread false information. We have financial records documenting $47 million in Chinese intelligence payments to his family accounts. We have intercepted communications showing him passing classified information to foreign agents. We have testimony from intelligence officials he threatened and intimidated. We have security camera footage of his meetings with Chinese intelligence officers. We have his own voice on recorded phone calls agreeing to commit murder at the direction of a foreign government. Yes, I'd say we have evidence." Another reporter, this one from CNN, asked the question everyone was thinking. How could someone in his position, with his background, with his responsibilities, do something like this? Bongino's answer was simple and profound. Power corrupts, and when power is combined with arrogance and a belief that you're above the law, it corrupts absolutely. Adam Schiff believed he was smarter than everyone else. He believed his Harvard education and his political connections made him untouchable. He believed he could lie to the American people with impunity because no one would ever call him on it. He was wrong. The press conference continued for another hour, with Bongino methodically laying out the case against Schiff. He showed selected evidence. He played portions of recordings, enough to prove his claims without compromising ongoing investigations. He answered every legitimate question with facts, data, and cold, hard proof. By the time he finished, even the most skeptical reporters had to acknowledge that this wasn't political theater. This was a genuine treason case backed by overwhelming evidence. In the federal holding cell, Adam Schiff sat on a metal bench, still wearing his red power tie, still in his expensive suit, but looking nothing like the confident senator who had entered the FBI building that morning. His lawyers had arrived, three of Washington, D.C.'s most expensive criminal defense attorneys, and they sat across from him in the small meeting room with expressions that ranged from shock to despair. "How bad is it?" Schiff asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. The lead attorney, Marcus Chen, a man who'd successfully defended senators, governors, and Fortune 500 executives, looked at his client with an expression Schiff had never seen before. "Pity. Adam, it's worse than bad. It's catastrophic. They have you on tape admitting to passing classified information. They have financial records showing foreign payments. They have you on a recorded phone call discussing murder. This isn't a case we can win at trial. This is a case where we're going to be negotiating to keep you off death row." The words landed like physical blows. Death row, the ultimate consequence for the ultimate betrayal. "There has to be something," Schiff said desperately. "Suppression motions, procedural arguments, jurisdictional challenges. You're the best lawyers in Washington. There has to be some way." "There isn't," Chen interrupted gently but firmly. "They built this case perfectly. Every piece of evidence was obtained legally. Every recording has proper judicial authorization. Every witness has been vetted. Bongino spent 4 years making sure this case was bulletproof. And Adam, I'm going to be honest with you because you need to hear it. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen a case this airtight. Not even close." The other attorneys nodded in agreement. One of them, Sarah Rodriguez, had reviewed the preliminary evidence the prosecution had provided. "Adam, they have you admitting to crimes in your own words. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. You literally say on tape that you're passing classified information to Chinese intelligence. You literally discuss payment terms for murder. There is no defense strategy that overcomes that kind of evidence." The reality was setting in now, crushing down on Schiff with the weight of inevitable consequence. Everything he'd built, every achievement, every political victory, every carefully constructed aspect of his public persona, all of it was dust. Gone, destroyed by his own arrogance and greed. "What are my options?" he finally asked. Chen laid it out clinically, like a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. "Best case scenario, you fully cooperate. You tell them everything. Every contact with Chinese intelligence. Every piece of classified information you passed. Every dollar you received. Every crime you committed. You help them roll up the entire Chinese spy network you were part of. Maybe if you give them enough, they'll take the death penalty off the table. Life in prison in solitary confinement, that's your best case. And worst case," Chen didn't hesitate. "Worst case, you go to trial, you're convicted on all counts, and the jury recommends death. Given the nature of the crimes, the number of Americans who died because of your actions, and the current political climate, I'd say there's a 70% chance a jury recommends execution. And with this evidence, there's a 99% chance of conviction." Schiff sat in silence, processing the death of his future. He'd always imagined himself as a historical figure, but not like this. Not as a traitor, not as someone whose name would be spoken in the same breath as Benedict Arnold and Aldrich Ames. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You don't have time," Rodriguez replied. "Bongino is giving you 24 hours to decide if you're going to cooperate. After that, the offer disappears and you go to trial. 24 hours, Adam. That's all you get to decide if you want to live or die." As the lawyers left, Schiff was returned to his cell. A small room 8 feet by 10 feet with a metal bed, a sink, and a toilet. No windows, no luxury, no power, just 4 walls and the crushing weight of consequence. That night, as Adam Schiff lay on the uncomfortable mattress staring at the ceiling, he thought about his career. All those television appearances, all those speeches, all those moments when he'd positioned himself as the defender of democracy, the guardian of truth, the patriot fighting to protect America. And he realized, perhaps for the first time, that he'd actually believed his own lies. He'd convinced himself that the ends justified the means. That stopping Trump was so important that lying was acceptable. That protecting his version of democracy was worth betraying actual democratic principles. And once you start down that path, once you decide that your cause is so righteous that any tactic is justified, it becomes easier and easier to cross lines. From lying to the media, to threatening judges, to fabricating evidence, to taking foreign money, to passing classified information, to agreeing to murder. Each step seemed reasonable at the time. Each betrayal felt justified by the greater good he was serving. But there was no greater good. There was only his ambition, his greed, his desperate need to be important, to be powerful, to be right. The next morning, Schiff met with his lawyers again. His decision was made, though it brought him no peace. "I'll cooperate," he said quietly. "I'll tell them everything." What followed was 3 months of exhaustive debriefings, every meeting with Chinese intelligence, every piece of information passed, every payment received, every lie told. The FBI assembled a team of 50 agents just to process Schiff's revelations. The scope of the Chinese spy network he revealed was staggering. Other congressional staffers who'd been recruited, journalists who'd been compromised, business leaders who'd been taking Chinese money, technology executives who'd been passing secrets. The network extended into every level of American government and society. Each revelation led to more arrests, more investigations, more trials. The damage assessment took months. How much classified information had been compromised? Which intelligence operations had been blown? Which agents were at risk? The CIA had to pull hundreds of officers out of deep cover positions around the world. Military strategies had to be revised. Defense programs had to be restructured. The betrayal was so extensive that America's intelligence community would be dealing with the consequences for a generation. Meanwhile, the media was engaged in its own reckoning. How had they been so easily manipulated by Schiff? How had they given him unlimited airtime to spread lies without ever demanding proof? How had their hatred of Trump made them blind to what Schiff actually was? Some journalists apologized. Some resigned. Some tried to deflect blame. But the damage to media credibility was profound and possibly permanent. The American people had been told for 4 years that Schiff had evidence, that he'd seen proof, that he knew things they didn't, and it had all been lies. 6 months after his arrest, Adam Schiff stood in federal court for sentencing. He pled guilty to all charges as part of his cooperation agreement. In exchange for his testimony against other members of the Chinese spy network, prosecutors had agreed not to seek the death penalty. But that was the only concession. Judge Patricia Morrison, a federal judge with 30 years on the bench, looked down at Schiff with an expression of cold fury. "Mr. Schiff, in 3 decades of presiding over criminal cases, I have never encountered a betrayal of this magnitude. You were given extraordinary trust. You had access to the nation's most closely guarded secrets. You were entrusted with oversight of our intelligence community. And you used all of it not to serve America, but to serve yourself and a foreign adversary." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. "The presentence report indicates that your actions directly resulted in the deaths of at least 23 American intelligence officers and military personnel. 23 families who will never see their loved ones again, because you sold them out for money. The report further indicates that you compromised defense programs that cost American taxpayers billions of dollars and gave strategic advantages to a hostile foreign power. The damage you caused is incalculable." Behind Schiff in the gallery sat those families, mothers who'd lost sons, wives who'd lost husbands, children who'd lost fathers. They'd come to see justice delivered. Some wept quietly, some stared with hatred at Schiff's back. All of them waited for the sentence they knew was coming. "The prosecution has requested, and I am inclined to grant, the following sentence," Judge Morrison continued. "On the count of treason, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. On the count of espionage, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, to run consecutively. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, 30 years, to run consecutively. On various counts of bribery, fraud, and obstruction, an additional 45 years, to run consecutively." She looked at Schiff directly. "Mr. Schiff, you will spend the remainder of your life in federal prison, specifically at ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal Supermax facility. You will be held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day for the rest of your natural life. You will have no contact with other prisoners. You will have minimal contact with the outside world. You will never be released. You will die in that cell alone, forgot, a footnote in history as an example of what happens when ambition and greed corrupt public service." Schiff's shoulders shook. Whether from crying or shaking, it was hard to tell. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely audible. "I'm sorry." "I'm sure you are," Judge Morrison replied coldly. "You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you have to face consequences. But I've read your debriefing transcripts, Mr. Schiff. I've seen your explanations. Not once did you express genuine remorse for the Americans who died because of your actions. Not once did you acknowledge that you betrayed your oath, your country, and the trust placed in you. You're sorry for yourself, not for what you did. And that, sir, is why you deserve every single day of the sentence I'm imposing. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. Adam Bennett Schiff, former prosecutor, former congressman, former senator, was now federal prisoner number 47,291. As marshals led him away, the families of his victims stood, not in celebration, but in sad acknowledgement that justice, while necessary, couldn't bring back the people they'd lost. Schiff shuffled out of the courtroom in his prison jumpsuit and shackles, no longer the confident figure who dominated cable news for years. Just a broken old man facing the rest of his life in a concrete box. Dan Bongino held a final press conference that afternoon. The crowds of reporters had thinned somewhat, the initial feeding frenzy over, but every major outlet was still represented. Today, Adam Schiff was sentenced to multiple life terms in federal prison, Bongino announced. This concludes one of the most significant treason investigations in American history, but I want to use this moment to send a message that extends far beyond one man's crimes. Paused, his street cop directness cutting through the formal setting. To every politician, every bureaucrat, every person in a position of public trust who thinks they're above the law, who thinks their political connections will protect them, who thinks they can betray America and get away with it, you need to understand something very clearly. We're watching, we're investigating, we're building cases, and we will catch you. The Schiff case took 4 years to build because we wanted to make sure it was perfect. We wanted every piece of evidence legally obtained, every witness credible, every argument airtight, and we succeeded. Adam Schiff had the best lawyers money could buy, and they couldn't find a single flaw in our case. That's the standard we're setting. That's the level of professionalism the American people should expect from their FBI. A reporter asked, "Deputy Director, do you believe there are others like Schiff still in government?" Bongino's answer was unequivocal. Absolutely. The Chinese spy network Schiff was part of extended into multiple agencies, multiple congressional offices, and multiple levels of government. We've already made 17 additional arrests based on information Schiff provided. There will be more. The corruption runs deep, but we're digging it out, one traitor at a time. Another question came from the back of the room. What's your message to the American people who feel like their government betrayed them? This time, Bongino's answer was personal, emotional even. I understand that feeling. I spent 12 years in the Secret Service protecting presidents, and then I watched as people like Adam Schiff corrupted the institutions I'd served. It's infuriating, it's heartbreaking, but here's what I want everyone to understand. The system worked. It took time, patience. It took a lot of hard work by a lot of dedicated FBI agents and prosecutors, but the system worked. The bad guys got caught. Justice was served. America is still America. The Constitution isn't just a piece of paper. It's a framework that has survived for over 230 years because it's built on the principle that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. Not a senator, not a congressman, not even a president. We all play by the same rules. We all face the same consequences when we break those rules. And that's what makes America different from countries like China, where Schiff's masters operate. Adam Schiff thought he could get away with betraying his country because he was smart, because he was connected, because he was powerful. He was wrong, and anyone else who thinks they can follow in his footsteps needs to learn from his example. You will get caught, you will get prosecuted, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison. The press conference ended, but Bongino's message resonated across the nation. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from satisfaction to sadness to demands for more investigations. The hashtag #NoOneAboveLaw trended globally. Memes celebrating Schiff's downfall proliferated. But beneath the jokes and the tribal political reactions, something more profound was happening. Americans across the political spectrum were grappling with a hard truth. Their government had been infiltrated by foreign intelligence to a degree that most had never imagined. The man who'd positioned himself as defending democracy had actually been working for a communist dictatorship. The lies had been so extensive, so systematic, so confident that millions had believed them. The reckoning extended beyond just Schiff and his co-conspirators. Congress launched multiple investigations into how such extensive foreign penetration had gone undetected for so long. The intelligence community underwent major reforms. Security protocols were strengthened. Background checks were intensified. The assumption of trust that had existed was replaced with a culture of verification. In Beijing, the exposure of the Cardinal Network was a disaster for Chinese intelligence operations. Years of careful cultivation burned overnight. Assets disappeared. Networks collapsed. The MSS officers involved were quietly disappeared by their own government, scapegoats for an operation that had been exposed through Schiff's arrogance and carelessness. The damage to China's ability to spy on America would take a decade to rebuild. Meanwhile, at ADX Florence, Adam Schiff began the first day of his life sentence. His cell was 7 feet by 12 feet, with a concrete bed, a concrete desk, and a concrete stool. No contact with other prisoners, no television, no internet. Just 23 hours a day in that concrete box with nothing but his thoughts and his regrets. 1 hour a day he was allowed into a slightly larger concrete recreation area. Alone, always alone. His mail was read and censored. His phone calls were monitored and limited. His visitors, what few he would eventually have, were separated from him by thick glass. This would be his existence until the day he died. Decades of sitting in that cell, thinking about the choices that brought him there, the Americans who died because of him, the family he'd destroyed, the country he'd betrayed. Some people thought this was justice. Some thought it was mercy compared to the death penalty he'd avoided. But for Adam Schiff, it was a living death, and in many ways worse than execution. 5 years passed. The initial media frenzy around Schiff's case had faded into historical memory. New scandals dominated the news cycle. New investigations captured public attention. But the reforms implemented after his exposure remained. The intelligence community was more secure. Congressional oversight was more rigorous. The FBI's counterintelligence operations were more aggressive. Dan Bongino had retired from the FBI after 3 years as deputy director, returning to his first love, broadcasting and commentary. But his legacy was secure. He'd taken down one of America's most powerful traitors and rebuilt public trust in law enforcement. His name would forever be associated with accountability and justice. In ADX Florence, Schiff had aged dramatically. 5 years of solitary confinement had taken its toll. His hair was completely white. His face was deeply lined. His body was thin from the limited recreation and bland prison food. He spent his days reading mostly history books. He'd become particularly interested in other traitors throughout American history, perhaps trying to understand how he'd become one himself. Benedict Arnold, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, Aldrich Ames, Robert Hansen. He read their stories, saw the parallels, recognized the patterns, the arrogance, the belief that they were justified, the confidence that they wouldn't be caught, the devastating consequences when they were. His children no longer visited. They changed their names, trying to escape association with their father's crimes. His wife had divorced him within months of his conviction. She'd claimed ignorance of his activities, and prosecutors had ultimately believed her, concluding she'd been an unwitting accomplice used to launder money. She'd testified against him, provided evidence, and then disappeared into obscurity. Schiff was alone in every sense of the word. Isolated physically in his cell, abandoned by family and friends, forgotten by the political establishment that had once courted his favor. He'd wanted to be remembered by history, and he was, just not the way he'd imagined. On the 10th anniversary of Schiff's arrest, several documentaries were released examining the case. Filmmakers had had a decade to review evidence, interview witnesses, and piece together the full story of how a Harvard-educated prosecutor became a Chinese spy. The documentaries were watched by millions. They featured interviews with FBI agents who'd worked the case, prosecutors who'd tried it, and most powerfully, family members of Americans who died because of Schiff's betrayal. One interview particularly stood out. Marcus Rodriguez, the Navy SEAL who'd survived Operation Neptune's thunder and testified against Schiff, spoke about his dead teammates. "People ask me if I got closure from Schiff's conviction," Rodriguez said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I didn't. Justice happened, yes, but it doesn't bring back Petty Officer Mitchell or Chen or Williams." It doesn't change the fact that 3 American warriors died because a congressman valued Chinese money more than American lives. So no, there's no closure. Just a permanent reminder that some people can't be trusted with power. The documentaries also examine how Schiff had been able to deceive so many people for so long. Psychologists analyzed his personality, identifying classic traits of narcissism and sociopathy, the need for power and recognition, the ability to lie without remorse, the lack of empathy for his victims, the belief that rules didn't apply to him. Media critics examine how networks had given Schiff unlimited airtime without ever demanding he produced the evidence he claimed to have, how confirmation bias had made journalists accept his accusations without skepticism, how the desire to damage Trump had overridden basic journalistic standards. It was a damning indictment of both Schiff and the institutions that had enabled him. The documentaries concluded with the same message Bongino had delivered 10 years earlier. The system worked, but barely. If Bongino and his team hadn't been so thorough, if they hadn't spent 4 years building an airtight case, Schiff might have gotten away with it. The margin between justice and impunity had been razor-thin. That realization drove continued reforms in how America protected itself from internal threats. Congressional legislation was passed mandating more extensive background checks for anyone with access to classified information. Financial disclosure requirements were strengthened, making it harder to hide foreign payments. Counterintelligence training became mandatory for all congressional staff with security clearances. The FBI's budget for counterintelligence operations was doubled, then doubled again. America had learned from Adam Schiff's betrayal. Learned that threats don't just come from foreign governments launching cyber attacks or sending spies. Sometimes the threat comes from within. Sometimes it's the people we elect, the officials we trust, the leaders we follow. Sometimes the greatest danger to democracy isn't an external enemy but internal corruption. And the only defense is eternal vigilance, rigorous oversight, and the willingness to hold everyone, especially the powerful, accountable to the same standards. In his cell, Adam Schiff turned 70 years old. He had no visitors, no celebration, no acknowledgement of the milestone. Just another day in the concrete box that was his home and would be until he died. He thought often about the choices that had brought him here. Not with remorse for his victims. The documentarians had been right about that. Even after a decade, he still didn't truly feel guilty for the Americans who died. He intellectually understood he should feel guilty, but the emotion never came. Instead, he felt guilty for himself, for throwing away his career, his family, his freedom, for being caught, for underestimating Dan Bongino and the FBI, for believing his own propaganda about being too smart, too connected, too important to face consequences. That was the real lesson he'd learned. Not that betraying America was wrong, but that getting caught was inevitable if you weren't careful enough. Even after everything, Adam Schiff still didn't understand why he was the villain of this story. In his mind, he'd been trying to protect democracy from Trump. In his mind, working with China had been a necessary evil to stop what he saw as a greater threat. In his mind, he was still the hero, just misunderstood and persecuted by his enemies. That's the truly frightening thing about people like Adam Schiff. They never really believe they're wrong. They never genuinely accept responsibility. They rationalize, they justify, they convince themselves that everyone else is the problem. Right up until the moment they die in a prison cell, they believe they were right and the world was wrong. 20 years after his arrest, Adam Schiff died in his cell at ADX Florence. He was 82 years old. The official cause of death was heart failure, though 2 decades of solitary confinement had certainly contributed. No family came to claim his body. No memorial service was held. No obituaries appeared in major newspapers. Federal prisoner 47,291 was cremated, and his ashes stored in an unmarked government facility. The man who wanted so desperately to be remembered by history was forgotten within days of his death. But the reforms he'd inspired lived on. The security protocols implemented after his case prevented other potential traitors from following his path. The investigations he'd triggered led to the exposure and prosecution of dozens of other Chinese assets in American government. The documentary filmmakers and historians who studied his case provided valuable lessons about the psychology of betrayal and the importance of vigilance. Adam Schiff's legacy wasn't what he'd intended. He wouldn't be remembered as a hero who stood up to Trump. He wouldn't be remembered as a defender of democracy. He would be remembered when he was remembered at all as a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when ambition overrides principle, when power corrupts absolutely, when a person decides they're above the law. In the end, that was the real story, not about partisan politics or Russian collusion or impeachment, but about one man's choice to betray everything he'd sworn to protect for money and power, and about how America, for all its flaws, still had enough strength in its institutions to catch him, prosecute him, and ensure he faced justice. The system's Dan Bongino had strengthened continued their work long after both men were gone. New counterintelligence officers, trained in the lessons of the Schiff case, monitored foreign threats. New FBI agents, inspired by Bongino's example of holding everyone accountable, investigated corruption without fear or favor. New journalists, chastened by how easily their predecessors had been manipulated, demanded evidence before repeating accusations. The circle was complete. Adam Schiff had tried to destroy American institutions to satisfy his ambition. Instead, his exposure and conviction had strengthened those institutions. His betrayal had made America more vigilant, more secure, more committed to the principle that no one is above the law. Sometimes, the most important lessons are learned through pain. Sometimes, the worst traitors inadvertently make a country stronger by forcing it to confront its vulnerabilities. Sometimes, justice delayed is still justice served. And sometimes, the right people, like Dan Bongino and his team of dedicated FBI agents, are in the right place at the right time to catch the bad guys and remind everyone that truth still matters, integrity still counts, and America is still worth fighting for. That was the real legacy of United States versus Adam Bennett Schiff. Not the conviction of one traitor, but the renewal of America's commitment to its founding principles. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. One nation under law with liberty and justice for all. Even especially when it's hard, even when it's painful, even when it means holding our own leaders accountable. Because that's what separates America from places like China. In America, eventually the truth comes out. Eventually, justice is served. Eventually, even the mighty fall when they betray the trust placed in them. Adam Schiff learned that lesson too late, but thanks to his prosecution, millions of Americans were reminded of it in time. And that made all the difference.